Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Harold Rousey. I am a member of the City Club Special Programs Committee, and I am a member of the Lakeside Courthouse Centennial Committee. Cuyahoga County Lakeside Courthouse opened its doors on New Year's Day 1912, just a few months before the City Club was founded. Today's program is a celebration of that shared centennial. Our panel is moderated by Judge Nancy Fuerst, Administrative and Presiding Judge of the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. She will introduce the other members of the panel. Your Honor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Herc. Last year, with the encouragement of County Council, the County Executive, with support from Downtown Cleveland Alliance and the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, the Centennial Committee assembled and began its task of formulating a plan to observe the courthouse 100th birthday. The committee, it was a very diverse and dedicated committee, all knew that they had a treasure on their hands and generously contributed much time and effort to focus on a celebration. We took a look at the history, the legal significance, the use of the courthouse in the present day, and the beauty of this magnificent structure, which is so lovingly coined or termed the crown jewel by Berj, Shakarian, our architect. Now we've set out to share this information with the community at large, with this first of those series, and to share our pride and to also enjoy sharing the celebration with those other institutions and landmarks who are observing a centennial in 2012. So without further ado, let me introduce to you the members of the panel. We have to my left Dr. Judith Cetina, County Archivist and Historian. She has been a member of the archive staff since 1977 and its manager since 1985. She is a published author, a frequent lecturer, and a frequent commentator for the local newspapers, radio, and TV, and you may have seen her quoted on the front page of the Metro section in yesterday's paper. Dr. Cetina is going to give us a description of what was happening 100 years ago at the national and local level. We welcome her, and I would just also urge you at some point in time, you may or may not have seen there are some handouts which are available at the table with more detail. Our second panelist is Judge Sean Gallagher, sitting on the Court of Appeals since 2003. He served as a Cleveland Municipal Judge from 1997 to 2002, a former prosecutor, probation officer, bailiff, floor sweeper at juvenile court, and an enthusiastic member of our committee. He has the good fortune of working in this building every day. He'll speak to us about the legal significance in some case. He'll mention in particular a case, but also just maybe name the significant cases that have gone through those hallowed halls. And again, he has another handout available at the front door. Finally, last but not least, Berj Shakarian, who served as our county architect from 1978 to 2009. That's a total of 31 years. He also worked for the City of Cleveland from 1969 to 1975 in their Office of Design and Construction as an architect as well. Some of his noteworthy projects are the restoration of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. He helped restore the county jail and also the coroner's office. But most importantly, he was the restoration architect of the Lakeside Courthouse. He knows every corner and every inch of that building, and he'll speak to us today about the art and architectural features which make this crown jewel what it is, and maybe he has got us some ideas on how we can keep it polished in the next 100 years. So with that, let's get underway. Dr. Cetina, would you be able to set the stage for us, describe what was happening on a national level and locally in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County in 1912? What did the population look like? Who were the shakers and movers? And what were the conditions in downtown Cleveland, and why this building at this time?
Well, thank you very much. I like to consider myself the opening act. We have the big guns will follow me, but as Frank Sinatra might have said, 1912, It was a very good year, and I won't sing, so please, that would not be pleasant. The January 1st, 1913 edition of the Cleveland Plain Dealer proclaimed 1912 as probably the greatest year in the history of Cleveland, and avowed that the sixth city had improved in beauty, finances, people, and morals. As with any year, it is difficult under the best of circumstances to chronicle its triumphs and tragedies, particularly when you only have 10 minutes to tell the story. If you'd like to learn more about this fascinating year, I do encourage you to read Dave Davis's article in yesterday's paper, the Metro section, or perhaps you might like to attend the talk that I'll be giving in June that I hope will fill the lacunae in today's narrative. And so I've created a brief timeline for 1912, one that focuses on significant events in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, but that also includes a look at what was occurring throughout the United States and abroad. My chronology will also reveal, on occasion, those times when moments of local and national significance converge. A chorus of Auld Lang Syne from a crowd of early morning revelers might have been heard in the distance as the 5th Cuyahoga County Courthouse on Lakeside Avenue opened to the public. According to one commentator, January 1st, 1912 was a gala day for Cleveland as overawed citizens were allowed to enter the building, to climb the marble steps, lifting their heads in the rotunda to see the stained glass above. The new courthouse not only provided space for the work of the county clerk, the probate court, the court of appeals, and the sheriff, but also served as a center of operations for Cuyahoga County government, with offices for the commissioners, treasurer, auditor, recorder, and surveyor, among others. The bells announcing the new year had scarcely finished ringing, and the excitement accompanying the inaugural day for the new county courthouse was just starting to wane when the Cleveland Municipal Court swung wide its doors on January 2nd with the striking of the gavel at 9:30 a.m. This institution had the distinction of being the second oldest municipal court in the United States, created by an act of the Ohio General Assembly in 1911. Evidence suggests it met in the old courthouse on the northwest quadrant of the public square, and this would appear to be identifying the third Cuyahoga County Courthouse, built in 1858 and later expanded with an addition of 2 stories in 1884. Although 1912 was a leap year, the extra day did not appear to add to the allure of the month of February. Valentine's Day that year did see the admission of Arizona to the United States as the 48th state. But outside of news about cricket, skating, soccer, and tennis, the other February highlight was a news item regarding Frederick R. Law, who parachuted from the Statue of Liberty. Law, identified as an aerial contractor and characterized as a daring steeplejack, apparently tired of swinging to and fro from flagpoles and moved on to more lofty heights. March 12th saw the establishment of the Girl Scouts in Savannah, Georgia, when Juliet Gordon Lowe announced that, quote, "I've got something for the girls of Savannah and all of America and all of the world, and we're going to start it tonight." And the annual sale of Girl Scout cookies, I think, reminds all of us that the Girl Scouts continue to flourish. March 17th is celebrated by all Clevelanders, whether or not they are sons and daughters of Aaron. And St. Patrick's Day in 1912 saw the then largest public gathering, about 200,000 people, to greet native son Johnny Kilbane, who became the world featherweight champion when he defeated Abe Attle in a 20-round bout on February 22nd of 1912. Washington, D.C. celebrated the arrival of spring on March 27th, as Helen Taft, wife of President William Howard Taft, a native son born in Cincinnati in 1857. So Helen, with the Viscountess Iwachinda, the wife of the Japanese ambassador to the United States, they planted 2 cherry blossom trees that still stand on the northern bank of the Potomac tidal basin. This event was commemorated just this past March 27th by First Lady Michelle Obama, who was to be joined by several dignitaries, including the Japanese ambassador. Expected to be present were the granddaughter of the Tokyo mayor, whose city donated 3,000 of the cherry trees as a sign of Japanese-American friendship. And also to be present was William Howard Taft IV, great-grandson of the president and his wife Helen. Any event attributed to April of 1912 is soon overshadowed by a tragedy that caught the attention of the world. That is the sinking of the RMS Titanic on April 15th. Although Bostonians might beg to differ, as April 20th, 2012 will mark the centennial of Fenway Park. Over 1,500 passengers on that ship perished in one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters. Now, Clevelanders were particularly stunned as the plane dealer reported on April 16th that 4 people on the ocean liner were destined for the sick city. This included one Richard Rouse, stepfather of the courthouse clerk, George Malin. Well, while the passengers may have been singing Nearer My God to Thee, Cleveland was singing the praises of the Cleveland Music School Settlement, an institution established on April 25th to provide music training for children and wage earners of the city's newly arriving immigrant population. The world's eyes turned from tragedy to triumph with the opening of the Games of the 5th Olympiad, held from May 5th to July 27th in Stockholm, Sweden. These games saw the debut of the decathlon and the pentathlon, both, by the way, won by Jim Thorpe. As summer approached, Massachusetts passed the first minimum wage law on June 4th, and on the 26th, Mahler's Ninth Symphony premiered in Vienna. July was one of those lazy, hazy summer months that yielded news largely related to our national pastime, that is baseball. This might, however, be the moment to remember Ray Chapman, shortstop, who joined the then Cleveland Naps in August of 1912, and by season's end he would go on to hit for a 312 average. Chapman sadly became the only professional baseball player to be killed by a pitched ball, and this occurred on August 16, 1920, in a game against the dreaded New York Yankees at the Polo Grounds. Chapman is buried in Lakeview Cemetery. Late summer thoughts turned toward politics, and on August 7th, the Progressive or Bull Moose Party nominated Theodore Roosevelt as its candidate for president. The campaign turned essentially into a 4-man race, and TR had a little over 27% of the popular vote, but would lose to Woodrow Wilson, who had almost 42% of the popular vote. However, he did garner more votes than Ohio's William Howard Taft, who had a little more than 23%, and Socialist Party Eugene Debs, who had just under 6% of the popular vote. Speaking of the Progressive Party, Newton D. Baker, later to serve as Secretary of War under Wilson, served as mayor of Cleveland from 1912 to 1916 and was known to back the progressive policies of Cleveland Mayor Tom L. Johnson, which served from 1901 to 1909. In September, Ohio voters were asked to approve a series of amendments to the state constitution. The electorate would end up supporting amendments that granted the state the power to approve legislation regulating working conditions in factories, creating the 8-hour day for public work employees, and establishing a mandatory workmen's compensation system. But despite the progressive nature of these reforms, those amendments which would have granted women the franchise, abolished the death penalty, and removed the word white from the Constitution were all rejected. Locally, the Junior League of Cleveland was established in September of 1912 by a group of 67 civic-minded women. One of their goals was to find suitable work for each individual member and to do that work carefully, intelligently, and faithfully. In addition, the circuit court was superseded by the Court of Appeals, the latter acquiring its jurisdiction from the state constitution as it was amended in 1912. October saw things heating up in the Balkans as Montenegro declared war against Turkey. On the home front, Teddy Roosevelt survived an assassination attempt as he campaigned in Milwaukee. Although shot in the chest where the bullet lodged, a 20, or some commentators have suggested, 50-page speech that he had inside his vest pocket and the carrying case for his glasses slowed the progress of the bullet. Roosevelt, instead of rushing to the hospital, first gave an 80, or some say 90-minute speech, which he told the audience it would take more than an assassin's bullet to kill a bull moose. He went to the hospital, but the doctors chose not to remove the .38 caliber slug, and so he carried it with him another 7 years until his death in 1919. Despite the magnitude of the events described above, Clevelanders remember October 28, 1912 as the date the City Club of Cleveland was incorporated under the laws of Ohio. On October 30th, 111 men attended an organization meeting for a social club with a civic purpose, and the meeting's main speaker, who was Newton D. Baker, expressed the importance for the club to preserve a nonpartisan spirit for an unbiased discussion of public matters. Celebrating its centennial, the City Club, a citadel of free speech, remains the longest uninterrupted independent forum series in the country, renowned for its tradition of debate and discussion. At this point, I think we could pause for applause for the City Club. The West Side Market opened on November 2nd of 1912. Identified as the city's oldest publicly owned market, it began in 1840 on a lot located at the corner of Pearl, which is now West 25th Street, and Lorraine Avenue. And in 1902, the city purchased a lot across the street for a new market, and a new market house was designed by the firm of Hibel and Bennis, also known as the architects for the Cleveland Museum of Art and Wade Chapel in Lakeview Cemetery, among other structures. December is a month when the whole world seems at peace. Some children watch sugar plums dancing in their heads or write letters to Santa, while others light the menorah or spin the dreidel. The only thing that caught my attention, and likely because I am an archivist, was this reference. Irving Fisher, probably better known as an economist, patented an archiving system with index cards. He later sold this index-visible filming system to Cardex Rand, which later became Remington Rand, in 1925. So after this whirlwind trip of the year 1912, let me end with apologies to Clement Moore. A happy spring to all, and to all a good afternoon.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Shakarian.
Yes.
Now, as an architect, this has got to be somewhat of a difficult task here, sitting outside the building we wish to talk about. For those who are listening and maybe tuning in today, maybe it would be best to place the building so that you have a general idea where it sits in the city of Cleveland. If you were standing on Lakeside Avenue, looking toward Lake Erie, you would look at the courthouse at the intersection of Ontario and Lakeside, and right behind it would be the Browns Stadium. So that's where we will begin. Berj?
Thank you, Judge. To place the building in the context of the art world and architecture, the important landmark is the 1893 Chicago Columbian Exhibition, where there was a change in the American perspective where the Victorian period ended. The Victorian period is considered the Romantic period in the United States. And that parallel basically with the reign of Queen Victoria, and with her passing away in 1901 that ended the Romantic period, which was a great period in itself. America changed. However, the Chicago exhibition has provided the neoclassical perspective of how the world should be organized, the idea of symmetry, the idea of balance, the idea of harmony, versus the romantic idea of the faraway places, the romanticism of emotion. Neoclassical emphasized the idea of rationalism. And in this light, you are looking at the courthouse as being the ultimate neoclassical building. In 1893, with the City Beautiful era being in progress, the gentleman who oversaw the Chicago exhibition, Daniel Burnham was invited to Cleveland by Tom L. Johnson as part of the group plan commission. The three leading architects that were part of that commission were Burnham, John Carrère, who was a graduate of École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, who were champions of the neoclassical movement, the idea of symmetry, rationalism, and in addition, Arnold Brunner, who designed the first building as part of the mall plan, which was the old federal building. As far as the courthouse, the architects for the courthouse were Lehman and Schmidt, who were politically connected architects. They had designed the addition, the 2 floors of the 5th courthouse in Public Square. Before I go to that great story, as far as the courthouse number 3 was concerned in Public Square, the architect who designed it was exiled from the city. And the reason that he was exiled is when Lincoln's cortege came through Public Square, he was overheard that he made a statement that Lincoln's passing away was no big deal. And at that time, the public was incensed. He was exiled from the city, and his name was carved out from the cornerstone. And today, if you would like to see the cornerstone, that's at the Western Reserve Historical Society. But going back to the mall plan, it was amazing how a prosperous Cleveland, who attracted all kinds of talent from throughout the United States to come to Cleveland and do things, was able to carry out the progressive vision of Mayor Tom L. Johnson, which was basically between 1903 to 1931. Basically, you are looking at, over a 20-year period. 1903 was when the group plan was presented to the mayor officially and to the city council and approved with a great deal of enthusiasm. As a matter of fact, the enthusiasm was so contagious that when the federal building was built, one of the murals inside the building was done again in a neoclassical style, that Cleveland is accepting the mall plan, the great civic plan, and that was in the federal courthouse. But what's so much more important is the iconography of the whole mall plan, the way it was developed. Even though the courthouse was the second building, it was the first building that was planned within the mall composition. And the way it was designed was that if you were an École des Beaux-Arts architect, and actually the building was designed by by Charles Morris, who was also a graduate of École des Beaux-Arts. And if you were to design a courthouse, you of course would use the Ionic capitals to express the idea of balance and justice, and that comes from Greek mythology. So the temples were done in honor of Hera, who was considered the ultimate justice, were done with Ionic capitals. So therefore, if you want to express the idea of the courthouse, you would build the courthouse with Ionic capitals. The federal building was designed with composite capitals. Why? Because it's a composite form of government. Then you go to City Hall, which was the third building in the mall plan, 1916, and that was done with Doric capitals, the idea of expressing direct form of government. And as you went through the library, which was finished in 1925, that was done with Corinthian capitals, and the idea behind that, to the Greeks, that was considered the ultimate sense of sophistication. So if you were to design a library, you would design with Corinthian capitals. And that went back to École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, from the Grand Prix of Rome, the idea of expressing buildings, the idea of communicating messages. The courthouse coming back has a great history as far as the way the composition of the building is organized. Unlike today's modern architecture, it has that kind of a sustainable quality to it. The entrance is oriented to the south. You have high ceilings. You have natural light coming through. For instance, just driving by the mall, I noticed that the new entrance to the mall, it's from the north side. It's from Lakeside. I mean, that's a blunder. How could you put the entrance to the north side of Cleveland? I mean, you have the winds coming from the lake. Nobody's going to be able to walk in the building. You know, the courthouse, the city hall are south orientation, which is the best orientation in this area to be able to walk in a building. You know, and not only that, there is that the public right of going up few risers, coming to a landing, going up few more risers, coming to a landing, and then entering the building. The building, not only that, as far as artwork, has an array of sculptures and murals. Also has a gesture towards the Indian influences, like the chief's head on the bronze doors. Inside, when you walk, you have the turtles, which to the Indian was a sign of wisdom. But one of the masterpieces is Frederick Wilson's stained glass window of justice, perfectly oriented to the east so that the sun can shine through the glass. It's a Tiffany design. Schweinfurt was a local architect who designed the interior, and there is a great story about him that when he was looking at the imperial staircase that he had designed, he got in an argument with one of the Italian masons, and the Italian mason was so disgusted with whatever instructions he was giving that he threw the chisel on the ground, and unfortunately a piece of marble got into Schweinfurt's eye, and he got blinded in one eye because of that. But the whole idea, I mean, look at the beautiful statement that they made. Justice is not blind in this courthouse. You know, we see the spirit of the law and we see the law. I mean, that's just a beautiful iconography. Just to show how attractive Cleveland was as the sixth city in the first decade of the 20th century, it attracted muralists like Sir Frank Brangwen from London to paint the Magna Carta, the 1215 with King John, unwillingly signing with his thumb the document. And Sir Frank Brangwen never came to Cleveland, but he was aware of Cleveland. The mural, the canvas, was sent to Cleveland to be installed. It's a 50-foot long canvas. But what's great about Sir Frank Brangwen, he was part of the European avant-garde. When Samuel Bing, who started the Art Deco movement in Paris, his gallery on Rue Chauchat in Paris, he commissioned Sir Frank Brangwen to paint the main mural at the entrance of his gallery. So I thought that was, I mean,
Berj, could you tell the ladies and gentlemen, you were the restoration architect.
Yes.
When did that occur?
Well, Bill Gaskill was the county administrator. Seth Taft and Bob Sweeney and George Voinovich were the commissioners. And they asked me to start. They told me that there were not enough funds to do the whole thing all at once. But as I go through it, do little by little to do the restoration. When I worked in the courthouse, the corridors were used as offices. The probate court was divided into like 3 offices. The whole gallery around the Court of Appeals now and half of the probate court, the corridors were basically partitioned offices. And the idea, and my idea was to take that slowly apart, repaint the walls, which at the time were like a yellowish tint painted. I did some research as far as the coloring. The dome that you see now, it's basically in the West Court, and that used to be used by the sheriff's offices. The holding cell was right next door to it, which is still there, but it's used only by domestic relations. And then I restore this whole space, which used to be the sheriff's area. But the whole idea was to do it little by little. I mean, the last thing that I did in the courthouse was to open the skylights. That was a major undertaking. The skylights were covered during World War II, since there was concern with German bombers coming from Canada, and they stayed like that until about 5-6 years ago when I reopened the skylights and also cleaned the Great Hall, you know.
Great. Well, I'm sure we're going to hear some questions because
Yes.
you can't talk enough about these particular features. This is such a magnificently appointed building.
The point that I just show a slide of the soldiers and sailors maquettes. Well, they are in the courthouse, the maquettes, but the point is that that was the Victorian romantic period that represented. It was dedicated in 1894. The same contractor who built the courthouse built the soldiers and sailors monument.
Very good. Thank you. We'll come back to
Yeah.
you, Berj. All right. Judge Gallagher, on the legal side of things, we know we've heard many important cases that have haunted the hallowed halls of justice there. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, obviously, in 100 years of courthouse history, you could pick any number of significant cases. In domestic relations court, obviously, there have been countless marriages and, unfortunately, countless divorces, and all the accoutrements that go along with that as far as child support, child custody issues, and certainly in probate court, all the wills and trusts and all the other assorted cases. But I thought that in the limited amount of time, since this is a very short program, when you're given 10 minutes and you're a speaker, you wrap it all up to one. So I'm going to talk only about one case. And interestingly enough, the one case that I'll discuss is a case called Mapp v. Ohio. Now, if anybody went to law school any time from the mid-1960s on, you certainly studied Mapp v. Ohio, and you studied it relentlessly. But what amazed me about the case, and that's largely been lost to history, and this really is important in my view, because I think while the history is wonderful and the architecture is wonderful, courthouses are really about people. That's really what they're about. They're not really about anything else but the people and the issues of the day. And this particular case really has the most extraordinary personalities in one case that you can find, and it all passed through our courthouse in 1959. Now, in the upper left photo, you see a gentleman, and that's Archie Moore. Now, Archie Moore was the light heavyweight champion of the world. He's one of the few boxers in American history that fought in not only in Joe Louis's day and Muhammad Ali's day, but across the spectrum, 4 decades as a boxer. Won an incredible 185 fights and won them by 131 knockouts. So when you think about that, he's quite a remarkable boxer. In the upper right-hand corner on the left in the dark trunks is a gentleman named Jimmy Bivens, who was a native Clevelander and who also plays into the Mapp v. Ohio story. And the young woman you see depicted there is Dolly Mapp, and she is really the star of the show. Now, Dolly Mapp was originally born in Texas. She came to Cleveland at age 10 to live with an aunt to take advantage of opportunities in the North. She met Jimmy Bivens, eventually married him. They had needless to say, a tumultuous relationship. She left Jimmy Bivens and ended up with Archie Moore. Dolly was an interesting person. At one time, the story goes that Archie Moore reneged on a promise to marry her, so Dolly Mapp was no fool. She filed a lawsuit against him in an effort to compel the marriage. Needless to say, it wasn't successful. But the fascinating thing about Dolly Mapp is that this is a young, single woman, African-American woman in the 1950s who's faced with a serious legal challenge, and that is the search of her home. On May 23rd of 1957, the Cleveland police showed up at her residence in search of a purported bombing suspect. Now, in the lower left-hand corner, you see a residence depicted there. That's 14705 Milberton Avenue on the Shaker-Cleveland border. The house is still there, looks very much the way it did back in May of 1957. Now, this gentleman, you'll know from the headline, is none other than Chandra Burns, Alex Chandra Burns. He was born Alexander Bernstein back in 1907 in Austria-Hungary, which later became part of Czechoslovakia. That picture in the lower right-hand corner is from a mugshot in 1949 when he purportedly put a bomb on the back of another mobster's car when the mobster refused to pay him a 25% interest in his business. Now, Burns was a notorious racketeer in the sense that he offered protection. And he offered protection to the numbers rackets in Cleveland by basically serving as a peacemaker or a supposed peacemaker. He had a number of business interests, including a couple of restaurants, and he also worked at a towel supply company where that was more or less his front. Burns met an untimely end on March 15th of 1975 when he was reportedly bombed by Danny Green behind Christie's Lounge at 2615 Detroit Avenue in Cleveland. Now, the individual depicted here, everyone knows him. It's none other than Don King, the one and only Don King. Don King was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1931, and what many people don't realize is before going on to become the most famous boxing promoter in history, he was involved in the numbers rackets in Cleveland. And Dalry Mapp was a friend of Don King's and basically did work for him. Now, the photograph on the left depicts Don King, and he's getting ready to testify at trial. What happened was Chandra Burns tried to force Don King out of business because Don King wasn't paying the protection money to Chandra Burns. So he had Don King's house on 151st Street bombed, and the house is still there to this day. Well, Don King, to his credit, wasn't going to take things lying down with Chandra Burns. He went to the police, told them who all the racket people were, that they were out to kill him, and he basically said, I'll testify against them. And at the time, John T. Corrigan, the county prosecutor, indicted this is not John T. Corrigan, this is Carl DeLau, but the county prosecutor indicted the racket individuals and went ahead with a trial on it. Now, to show you what times were like in the 1950s and the interesting nature of this case is, Don King was actually shot in the time between when the indictment came out and when the trial took place in an effort to keep him from testifying, but he showed up. This individual, Carl DeLau, was the investigator in charge of the case, and those of you that have spent time in the courthouse years ago would remember him. He was a police officer for nearly 40 years, and Jim Willis, who a noted Cleveland attorney who helped me immensely gain insight into many of these individuals, described him as a straight shooter and an honest guy. And DeLau had many contacts with Chandra Burns and various other individuals, and he just died recently in January of 2008. But an interesting individual. He won a Purple Heart in Europe in October of 1944. And interesting because he was born of German parents, and he fought in the Western Theater in World War II in Europe against the German army. So kind of an interesting story. This is another rather amazing woman who's lost, in my view, to history. When John T. Corrigan was the prosecutor, he really inherited, in a sense, in that she was already in the office. But this is Gertrude Bauer Mann. She was born in Toledo and came to Cleveland to go to law school and graduated from Cleveland Marshall in 1940. She was the only woman in her graduating class. She was hired by Frank Culleton in the county prosecutor's office that year, and she went on to be quite an amazing figure. In that, in 1957, John T. Corrigan entrusted her with the responsibility for the Mapp case. Now, imagine this. Here's a woman working in a male-dominated profession, and certainly this is a significant case. It was on the front page of all 3 Cleveland newspapers the day after the search, and yet John T. Corrigan entrusted her with the case and allowed her to pursue the case, not only through the courts here, through the appellate court here in our building in 1959, onto the Ohio Supreme Court, and on the United States Court of Appeals where she argued. And if you go online, you can still hear her argument today. It's taped and it's available. You can listen to her argue on the constitutional issues in Mapp v. Ohio. And this is John T. Corrigan on the right, and on the left is Frank Culleton. Frank Culleton is an amazing character. He was the Portage County prosecutor from 1915 to 1918. In 1931, he was appointed the Cuyahoga County prosecutor when Ray T. Miller was elected mayor. In those days, you were only elected mayor for 2-year terms. And I bet Miller regrets giving up the job because he got beat in 1933. So he had the job for less than 2 years, really. But Culleton was an amazing figure in that he went after the rackets to such a degree that at one point he didn't trust the sheriff. So what he did is he rounded up his own posse of men, deputized them, and went out and personally raided places where gambling and other nefarious activity was taking place. A very interesting figure. Between John T. Corrigan and Frank Culleton, they held the office for a combined 60 years, from 1931 to 1991. So it's a very interesting experience. Now, on the lower left and upper left is the house at 3715 East 151st Street, where the bombing took place. Don King lived in the lower portion of that home. The home is still there. You can see it today. And the upper porch has been modified, but it's there. To the right is Virgil Ogletree. Virgil Ogletree was in the United States Marine Corps with Jim Willis years ago, and when he came out, he started a dry cleaning business on the east side. He had a number of legitimate businesses, but admittedly so, Virgil Ogletree was also involved heavily in the gambling operations. Now, when King's house was bombed, King told Carl DeLau and the police that he thought Ogletree was responsible because he was one of Chandra Burns's partners. And Ogletree was actually in Mapp's house when they went to search the residence. Now, what happened that day was Carl DeLau went out there, and Dalry Mapp, being a sophisticated individual, said, "Where's the warrant?" And in Ohio, you technically had to have a warrant, but there was no exclusionary rule in place in Ohio at the time. So DeLau said, well, we'll get a warrant. He called his supervisor, and the supervisor said, don't worry, we'll send a warrant out. But the police never had a warrant. So eventually they forced their way in the residence. There was a struggle. They find purportedly 4 obscene books in Dalry Mapp's residence. So this case started out about obscenity, really. It started out about a bombing and a bombing suspect. And Ogletree never, it turned out, never had anything to do with the bombing of King's home. He was never charged. But lo and behold, the case went on to become the most significant case, not because of obscenity, but because of search and seizure. And what happened essentially was the case went up through the courts, and Mapp lost consistently. Yet she steadfastly stayed with it. She had several excellent lawyers, Mr. Kearns and Seymour Terrell and Mr. Berkman and others all contributed, and they took the case up, and eventually it made it to the Supreme Court. So when you think today, the legacy of the case, really, when you think about it, that what do the police need to enter your residence and conduct a search, I think universally most people would say they need a warrant. And where did that all come from? Well, it came from the courthouse in 1959. The case passed through our courthouse, went on to the Supreme Court. It's probably one of the 5 most significant cases in American history. So that's, in essence, the one case we had time to talk about. And if you want to read about it further at greater length or more about the individuals, I would suggest I have a nice little publication out there for you can take with you if you want to read about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. You can tell he really likes his work. It's worth noting also that the Sam Shepard case, the trial and retrial, came through that building. Terry versus Ohio, that's the stop and frisk law, was developed through there in Jacobellis. It's porn when I know it when I see it case. Yeah, right. Those are other cases that came through the building as well. Before we begin to take questions, I just want to briefly invite the public, to come and visit the courthouse. We are going to be conducting free courthouse tours and lectures, followed by refreshments on 3 occasions here: April 29th, June 10th, and September 23rd. Unless there's a Browns game, and we'll change that date. They are all Sunday afternoons. We're going to open the courthouse for free. We will walk the public through the courthouse and then hear some more information and allowing our speakers to expound on what we've heard here today in a little more detail. And we know that anyone who comes will enjoy this. It is a real treat to tour that building. So I hope you'll remember. If you need the information, it will be found on the City Club website, on the Cuyahoga County website, and the Common Pleas Court for Cuyahoga County website as well. Now, with that, Kirk?
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a special program featuring a panel discussion looking at the 100 years of the Lakeside Courthouse. We will return to our speakers momentarily for the traditional City Club questions. Please formulate questions now, and remember to be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those listening to our live webcast, supported by the University of Akron. This year, 2012, the City Club of Cleveland turns 100 years old. There are several programs scheduled, including the second in the Encore Speaker Series, April 18th, with John Dean, former White House counsel to President Richard Nixon. For more information on this and other programs, visit the 100th Anniversary tab on our website. For more information about our upcoming forums, to learn how to order a CD or DVD of today's program, or to listen to a podcast of any of our past programs, please visit our website, www.cityclub.org. We would like to welcome guests today at tables hosted by the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, the Court of Appeals, the Domestic Relations Court, Judge Nancy Fuerst, and Judge Sean Gallagher. Thank you for your support. Now we would like to return to our speakers for the traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today are City Club Special Program Committee Co-Chair Michael Kallstrom and City Club staff member Carrie Miller.
All right. I think Judge Cooney has a...
My question is to the architect, Mr. Shakarian. Why does the courthouse have a great hall and not a rotunda?
What's your question, Judge?
Why does the courthouse have a great hall and not a rotunda?
The configuration of the building was such, the composition being rectilinear, the idea was to have 3 courts to allow for the daylight to come through. And based on the configuration, they could not have had a circular rotunda in the middle, because the circular rotunda would have dominated the whole composition and not allow for the rectilinear composition. Actually, what had happened was the plan was more ambitious. What they wanted, there was 1 column bay on each side, and in the last minute, the column bays, one from the east side, one from the west side, were cut to bring it into the budget. So,
Is it true also, Berj, that the way that the construction is, as one enters on the south entrance, there is a huge grand rectangular hall? Does that also serve the function in the days prior to air conditioning, et cetera?
oh,
Did that have something to do
definitely,
with the
definitely.
airflow?
The building is designed very sustainable to allow for ventilation, to allow for daylighting, the high ceilings, the idea of opening up windows. I mean, that was part of the whole scenario. The greatest damage that was done to the building was in 1964, when it was where the electricity was converted from DC to AC and air conditioning. The air conditioning really hurt the building. I mean, just imagine that the courtrooms on the 3rd floor in domestic relations, each one of the courtrooms had a skylight. And the skylights were taken out in order to accommodate for the ductwork for air conditioning. Some of the substantial stenciling work was painted over, you know. But today, the courthouse, we repointed, we cleaned it. The exterior, which is Milford Pink from Massachusetts, it's beautiful stone. I mean, it's the same stone that they use on the Perry Monument at Putnam Bay. However, when they signed the architects, Lehman and Schmidt, who were politically connected in 1902, it took them a great deal of time to do the work, the design. But one of the big arguments was that the Berea sandstone quarries lobbied the county commissioners to build the building with sandstone rather than granite. Luckily, the commissioners stood their ground and the building was built with granite rather than sandstone. The sandstone would not have lasted for 100 years, especially with acid rain. It would have turned to plaster.
Judge Gallagher, I'm intrigued by the fact that John T. Corrigan appointed the only woman in the office, Gertrude Mann, to handle Map v. Ohio and argue it. Do you have any more information as to why she was the one chosen to do it?
I spoke with some individuals that knew her. Jim Willis told me she was extremely bright, had a tremendous grasp of constitutional issues. In fact, he said she handled a number of extradition cases for the office. Leo Spelliscy told me that anytime they had a constitutional issue, they often went to her and asked her, and apparently she was very bright. I mean, obviously, she's the only woman in her law class in 1940 and graduates, and it's stunning to look at that photo. You see nothing but men and one woman. And then she gets this case, and to me, that's the most remarkable thing, is that in 1957, not only is she assigned the case, and if you read some of the transcripts on this, on September 3rd of 1958, John T. appears with her in the courtroom at the initial motion to suppress and says, the case is Miss Mann, she'll handle it, and she handled it not only there, but I think what's remarkable is most men would have tried to take that case away, right, from a woman in the 1950s, and yet she handled it not only at the trial court level, but in our Court of Appeals, at the Ohio Supreme Court, and on to the U.S. Supreme Court. So I don't have an exact reason why he picked her, but it seems as though she certainly had the ability.
To any members of the panel, we've been talking for the past, we've been talking about the history of the courthouse in the past 100 years. 100 years from now, what do you think, or what do you think people will be talking about, or should they be talking about, regarding the courthouse and its impact on the city of Cleveland?
Cetina, why don't you take that question?
Oh my goodness, that takes a little bit of foresight, and I hope the building will still be standing, and I do hope that there's a continued investment in preserving some of the older structures in our area. Certainly with the development of the casino, there has been a great deal of controversy about various structures. So I do hope that there certainly is a continuing investment in buildings like the courthouse. Obviously, I'm sure we'll see many more cases, perhaps not quite like the map case, but I think it's absolutely stunning. There's a sense of, I said that yesterday, of real majesty, of walking up the steps and finding sort of seated Jefferson and Hamilton, going back to our founding fathers. So it's like a legacy that goes back many years. And when you think of going the Magna Carta taking us back to 1215 and the foundations of democracy. So from that standpoint, I hope it continues to represent a citadel of justice.
Berj, what's the significance? The courthouse is registered on the national...
Oh, yes, 1973, it's on the National Register. But going back to his question, which is a very good question, the Justice Center may not be here, but the courthouse would be here. The new federal courthouse may not be here, but the old federal or the maximum courthouse would still be here. The way these buildings are designed, unlike the Justice Center and the new federal courthouse, these buildings are meant to age like old wine. They age. They become better as time goes on. Buildings like the Justice Center and the new federal courthouse, they decay. They fall apart. They don't get old.
Right. We have another question here.
Question for Berj Shakarian. Nearly every day I see the north side of the courthouse and what has been done there, which is, to me, is very, very unfortunate. What are the prospects, do you think, for trying to restore some of the grandeur that was intended for the north side of the courthouse?
I agree with you. As time, and that was a losing battle. The trades used that almost, the loading dock, and the custodian of the building used that as his, private domain with all kinds of junk. I mean, that has to be clean. I mean, no two ways. The problem that the courthouse has, they don't have a freight elevator. The existing elevator that they have, it's an outdoor elevator, basically. Supposedly, it was designed for both ADA and material access, and that doesn't work. I mean, it just doesn't work at all. I had some plans to put in a freight elevator and also allow for the ADA access to the courthouse, which for some reason they haven't done it. But that's a matter of concern, yes.
Speaking of the north side of the courthouse, I happened to see a picture there that showed a stream with a bridge over there, and I never, way back.
Could you go?
And I was wondering where that came from. There.
Oh, that somebody did that.
Maybe I can respond to it. So
The down-
at one
Great
side,
Gardens.
the north side of the courthouse looked onto what was called Lakeview Park. It was designed with pedestrian pathways, a small footbridge, a fountain, water flowing over terraced stones. The park was on Lake Erie, on land that was purchased as early as 1872. And park visitors were protected because there would have been nearby railroad tracks by an iron fence. But after 20 years or so, the proximity to the tracks took its toll, and the smoke from the Lakeshore Railway blackened the foliage and killed the trees. So, but if you look at that, it would have been just a lovely, a beautiful park. I've seen a couple of other images as well from Cleveland Memory and the Cleveland Public Library digital project, and it'll give you a little more information on what was called Lakeview Park.
All right. Number one, I want to thank our panelists today. We have gotten lots of information, but you can imagine what our meetings were like. We couldn't talk enough about each aspect of the Centennial. And so we will hope that you will come on another date and come and see it in person and hear more detail. Special thanks to Jonathan Schick, who's been working behind the scenes to help us compile not only today's slides, but also helping us maintain the website and doing all the techno stuff you need to do in these projects. Kirk Rousey and Uta Vilfoy for helping us put this program together. And many thanks also to the City Club. We are very pleased to be able to sit here and present to you on something that we love to do. And with that, Kirk?
Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a special program on 100 years of the Lakeside Courthouse with panelists Dr. Judy G. Cetina, Judge Sean Gallagher, and Berj A. Shakarian. Thank you, panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.